From California?
No, I was born in California.
Moved to New York?
And I'm here.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought you said.
I'm Nicole Fraser. I'm a junior, and I was born in Naperville.
Okay, I'm Julie. I'm a junior, and I was born in Chicago.
I'm Sadie. I'm a junior, and I was born in Illinois. Well, I'm not born in Hinsdale.
Hinsdale. Good.
I'm Claire. I'm a junior, and I was born in Ohio, and I was living in Saudi Arabia.
I'm Gina. I'm a senior, and I was born in Naperville.
I'm Allison. I was a junior, and I was born in Madison.
I'm Heather. I'm a junior, and I was born in Darien.
In where?
Darien.
I'm Jack. I'm a junior. I was born in Oak Park.
I'm Big. I'm a sophomore. I was born in Baltimore, Maryland.
I'm Sarah. I'm a sophomore, and I was born in South Carolina.
I'm Brian. I'm a junior, and I was born in Minneapolis.
I'm Brett, and I'm a junior. And I was born in Wisconsin.
Oh, I'm Pam Hill, and I was born in Brookfield.
I'm Betty, and I was born in Detroit, Michigan.
Okay, well,
Who are you?
I'm Kermit Eby. I was born in Wabash, Indiana.
I hate it forever. Where do you go?
Okay.
You guys got
Oh, yeah?
Is that good? Okay.
Okay. Okay, this is Contemporary Themes in U.S. History class, and we're doing this as a kind of an experiment to prepare for an assignment that the class has to interview somebody who lived through the Great Depression. And now Betty is not, her memories are not going to be that clear, but she did live during that period.
Yeah,
So
did.
okay, and so a personal note: Betty and I know. I can call you Betty instead of
Yes.
St. Angela. Okay, Betty and I didn't know each other, but she knew my grandfather, so that when I came to Naperville North, we had a connection. So there is, I mean, we've talked on and off about a lot of this history before. And anyway, I just think Betty, in terms of an oral history of one's own life, can tell us a lot about American history. And I think that's really important when we discuss historical issues, that we know that people lived through those periods and can tell us about their experiences and how they relate to what we read in the textbook. And I think a lot of that will come out in our discussion.
If you ask the right questions.
If I ask the right questions, which is a whole other thing. Okay. We talked last night, and I was hoping that you could tell everybody what you brought, and then we could tell everybody else about it. So.
All right. These are my mother's diaries, and the earliest one that I have is 1915. My sister has other copies that cover other years, and I noticed that there is none for the year I was born. Everybody else in the family has a diary, but there was none the year I was born.
Which was what year?
1923. Next year I'm going to be 70 years old, and it seems like yesterday. In fact, I said last night, I think I'm the oldest person in the district now, and that's a strange feeling. There may be one other person, but anyway, these diaries go through the Depression, and I didn't bring, she has some that went up to 47, 48, 49, but I didn't bring those. We were out of the Depression by then. But it was interesting to read her little sentences as to what was happening every day of the year during those years.
Okay. And then we have a picture of you.
Yes,
and your mom.
I have a feminist sister. Kermit doesn't know that. And one year for my birthday, she sent me a picture of my mother and a picture of her and of me. There's 8 years difference in us, so she must have been, well, I think the pictures were taken different years. But this was her feminist. I had 4 brothers, but she sent the pictures of the girls.
Okay.
But that's what that is. My mother with her fur muff, her winter coat.
Okay. Now, I thought we could start out with personal history. You were born in Detroit, Michigan?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan, at home.
At home in Detroit. What was Detroit like in those years?
We had our milk delivered by a milkman who drove a horse. The horse brought the cart, And we put a sign in the window for how many quarts of milk we wanted. Our ice was delivered to our refrigerators, and we put a card in the window to say we wanted 25 pounds of ice or 50 pounds of ice. And the refrigerator had a pan underneath it that we had to empty every day because the ice melted. The coal was delivered to the front of the house. It was put in the street by the curb, and then the people who had muscle took the wheelbarrow and the shovels and went out and shoveled the coal into the wheelbarrow, and then they took it up to the house and dumped it in a basement window into what we called the coal cellar. And then you took the shovel and you put it in the furnace.
So now your earliest memories of Detroit are in your home in the city?
Yes, yes, lived right in the city. I have a memory of an electric car,
Yeah.
a lady driving down the street in an electric car. We had street cars. Tracks ran right down the center of the street. There was something called an interurban. Detroit Zoo was, but it was a streetcar that went from town to town. Now we have our railroads and our loops and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and see, my image of Detroit now is a lot different than what your memory would be. Right?
That's right.
Detroit was like a big industrial center and a lot of wealth and a lot of working class people.
There was not as much poverty then. There was poverty, but there was not as much during that time until the strike started for the automobile companies. You had, Detroit was the automobile center of the nation, and when the companies laid off for their Christmas breaks, their change of models and all that, then people were out of work, and it was tough. But then labor began to fight the way management was handling things, and they went on strikes. We had sit-down strikes, and there were strike breakers who stood out there and went after the strikers. You've seen pictures, I'm sure, in the books of the fights that went on. My sister worked with a settlement house, which was a place, the one she worked at was for Polish people who were out of work and didn't have adequate things to keep them going, and she went on a visit to one of the Ford Motor Company plants and saw a fellow by the name of Harry Bennett carry his gun as he went around talking to the workers, trying to keep them in line.
He was at Pinkerton? Or
No,
something like
no, he was a labor breaker.
that? Oh, okay.
He was Henry Ford's right-hand man at keeping the help in control. But along the shore of, what was it, Lake St. Clair, or whatever that lake was right north of the Detroit River, were these huge mansions, because we had the automobile moguls who lived there, and they had huge homes. Now, if we compared them to some out here in the new district, I don't know how big they were, but they were made of stone and brick. They weren't just wood stones or wood houses.
No.
So there was wealth,
Oh, yeah.
and there was middle class, and I don't know where I fit into it.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. What your father's occupation
My
was?
father was a preacher. Most of the time that I was growing up, I told Mr. Eby that he did not have a church. He was not a pastor of a church. He was an administrator over a whole group of churches. And so that made a little difference. I wasn't just the ordinary preacher's kid who had to go and have the congregation look at him. Now, I don't know how many of you know what a church is like in order to know what I'm talking about in that regard, but it was different. He was an administrator in the church that we belonged to, which was the church that North Central College started. He didn't always get paid in money, because some of the places he went were in the country, and he would bring home cabbages and potatoes and carrots, and we had a place under the house where we stored them, and that kept us in food. In one of the diaries, my mother would talk about, we got the eggs from the farm. She grew up in a small farm community. She'd get 12 dozen eggs at a time in a wooden crate that came through the mail or were delivered on the train. I don't know. We got them. I don't know how they got there. But I've often thought now, how fresh was that last dozen of eggs? With no refrigeration to speak of.
So now, where did you go to high school? I'm thinking.
I went to high school in Detroit.
Do you have memories of the high school or what it was called?
Yes, it was Northwestern High School. I went to several different schools. I graduated from 8th grade, I graduated from 9th grade, and I graduated from 12th grade. All three, those were 3 different schools. But the high school I went to was a 3-year high school because in the complex where the schools were located, the middle school was 7, 8, and 9. You went first to 6th and then 7, 8, and 9. And so then I went to the high school.
Were there a lot of kids in the school? Was it one of those large Detroit?
Yes, there were 4,000 kids.
4,000.
And we had 2 buildings, and I opted, and I'm not sure it was the right thing to do, to go into what we used to call a commercial courses. It was business ed was what it was. So that I only had a few of college prep courses. And when I finally decided after working 3 years to come to college, I had to come in on probation because I had not taken chemistry, physics, or any of those other things, nor a foreign language. But I could add a column of figures.
So I'm thinking like your school probably looked like Lane Tech in Chicago. Have you seen that?
I can't compare.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Many of the schools that were built in the Chicago public school system are the 20s and the 30s, and they're huge, fast. 5,000 students out
Yes,
there at a time.
yeah.
So then now, okay, you moved from Detroit to Naperville then, right out of high school to go to college?
No. I worked 3 years for the FBI in Detroit before I came here to college.
So what was that like? What did you do?
And that was during the war. It was very fascinating. I was what they called a stenographer. And there must have been 70 of us. And we were all in one long room, the group I was with. The day that I walked in, after I had been hired, at the back of this long corridor where our desks were I don't know how many shortwave radio sets, all different sizes. But they had been confiscated. They had been taken from German nationals. They had been taken from Japanese people because they were so frightened of the fact that somebody might communicate overseas by their shortwave radios. And those were there for quite a few months. I don't know what they did to dispose of them. But that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. To work. How did you get a job with the FBI? And then I'm curious, just how much did they pay you? You were 18?
Mm-hmm. No. Yes, I was 18, yeah. $600 a year. I got, is that right, or was it $1,200? It was $1,200 a year. I got a raise to $1,260 the second year. We had to be evaluated, just like teachers. And it was interesting because we did a lot of internal security work at that time. We had agents who were out listening to the Communist Party meetings. And we always laughed because there were more agents listening than there were members of the Communist Party. I remember several reports that we wrote, and Marshal Tito's name was in those reports. And that always fascinated me.
Were they watching Americans as well?
Yes.
Is this how you met my grandfather? No, I'm just
No. But there was an organization called the German-American Bund, and they were under surveillance all the time. Anybody who did anything that looked a little suspicious, that was strange. Well, we went through it with the Iraqis.
Storm? Yeah.
It's the same thing. And you get in a country gets in a mood, and no matter what you do or say, until something changes that mood, you cannot change some people's minds. It's really we listen now to the movies that came out during those times, and we're right back in that same mood. We can remember. Used to go to the movies and watch, cry.
I'm gonna come back to that. Now we're at 1943, and then about.
I graduated in 1941.
So you work until 44, and then you come to college?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I came to college here in 1944.
Okay.
There were less than 500 students on the campus, and over 350 of them were girls. And I had just been working with downtown Detroit in an agency where there were 300 guys. Downtown Detroit. I came here. There were less than 100 fellas on campus. There was a small seminary here at the same time. So we had what we said 4Fs. These were guys who couldn't get into service. Or the pre-theologues. They were the ones who opted to be preachers so they wouldn't have to go to the Army. And I had come from sophisticated Detroit. Dorm hours were 7:30. As a freshman, you had to be in the dormitory at 7:30. At 9:30, you could walk downtown to Prince Castle or Cock Robin, and then you had to be in. The dorm was locked at 10 o'clock.
So now we're in North. How big was Naperville at the time?
7,000.
7,000. So it was a culture shock for you to come from the city into the country?
It was a wonderful culture shock. My mother used to tell me every time I got on to go downtown to work or was going to stay down to go to something, she'd say, "Now, Betty, you be careful. You remember what happened to that girl. Now, Betty, you be careful." And you hear that day after day after day, and pretty soon you're scared to death. And it was wonderful to come here and be able to walk downtown at, at 9:30 at night and not be scared.
Okay, now, let's see, I missed a couple things. Then you meet your husband here at North Central, or do you meet him after the war?
I met him after the war. He came back. He was going to go to the University of Chicago. He'd been accepted at the University of Chicago in their law program, but he couldn't find a place to live. So, this being the church college, he decided he'd come here and go to the seminary and see whether he liked that or not.
He didn't want to live in Hyde Park?
For some reason, he couldn't find a place to live. Now, that was before I knew him, so I don't know what the story is.
Okay.
But anyway, he was in seminary here, and we didn't meet until his next to last year in seminary. And I was, I think, a junior in college then.
You were studying what topic?
I was an English major.
And you wanted to be a teacher?
No. I went to college because I was tired of working. And I decided, this is terrible. I decided I was going to come to college and learn to play the organ. And we had a wonderful school of music over there. Well, 2 weeks into the year, I knew I was in the wrong place, but nobody told me I could get out. There was no counselor to say, "Betty, you can change your course now." So I stayed with that program for the whole year. And then the teacher of their shorthand and typing had a heart attack. And the head of the Commerce Department said, "Betty, you've got the skill, you take the job." So while I was a sophomore and junior in college, I taught college students shorthand and typing, one of them being my roommate, and I gave her a C, and that didn't go over very well.
So did they pay your tuition for that?
I came to college with $400 in my bank account for 4 years, knowing I was going to have to work. The first year I worked for the administrative dean. The second and third year I taught. And the fourth year, and then the year I stayed, I worked for the academic dean at the college. $300 a year, I think I got, or a semester I got. And I taught 9 hours. I could almost pay my $3.50 a week rent and eat at the same time. There were times that it was kind of tough, but I managed.
And you lived in a dorm or in a...
The first year I lived in the freshman dorm. First semester I lived in the freshman dorm. Second semester I moved over with the girls in Bolton Hall, one of the big old houses that isn't there anymore, where the sophomores and juniors were. Then the second year, when I was a sophomore, the college was given the Kraler Complex down here. You know where Little Friends are? And I got to live in that mansion that is called the mansion now. It's an alternative school. And we lived up in on the third floor. There were 6 of us in one room. No fire escape or anything. But the swimming pool was still there. The sunken garden was there. The orchard was there. But none of it was usable. And then I lived with a family 1 year. I lived with my English prof the 4th year. And ate with a bunch of teachers at an eating club. So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
did I finish it?
No, yeah.
I don't know.
Now, when did you meet your husband? And your husband's name is...
George.
Okay. And he's from...
He's from southern Indiana.
Okay. And he's going to become a minister.
He became a minister.
Now, is it important here for me to ask you about George and how you met? I think that would be helpful.
Well, I think as far as the college is concerned, it's important. George's mother and dad came to college and met here. They were here for 1 year. His dad was a football player from an Italian family up in Wisconsin, and he thought he was coming to Northwestern University to play football. North Central used to be called Northwestern. And when he got here and saw this little dinky school, he, I'll stay overnight and I'm going home. That night he met Lillian. And he stayed for the whole year. Now, she was German, he was Italian. And then he went off to the Navy. He did play at Great Lakes one time with the Navy football team. But as a result of their church connection, and our relationship with the church, George and I met here, and his two brothers met their wives here, and none of our kids have ever come here. But that's why it was important.
St. Angelo then is the Italian name.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I was going to go on and say, how you got married in what year?
49.
In 49.
Mm-hmm.
And you have how many children?
We have 3 children. One turned 38 yesterday, one turns 40 in January, and the other one turned 34 a few weeks ago. So.
And you've stayed in Naperville that whole time?
We lived in Indianapolis for 5 years. After we were married, we moved to the country because my husband had 2 little churches in 2 small towns in northern Indiana. And we were in the country for 5 months after we were married. Then he was moved to a big church in downtown Indianapolis, and we were there for 5.5 years. Then he came back up here to Naperville to be the first chaplain at North Central. And so that our 2 girls were born in Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis, where they take the 500 race drivers whenever they're hurt. And our son was born here in Aurora. And we have never had a real reason to move out of Naperville. However, we always said we would never raise our children here because it was too insulated. But we never had a reason to move. We talked about going to Evanston one time, but we didn't. The kids were happy in school, but we had a connection with a lot of different people because of our connection with the college students. Before the union was built, the college students used to come to our house. And that way, our children were exposed to a lot of different kinds of people. And my husband has always liked to travel. And having been overseas during the Second World War, he made a lot of connections. And he started taking college students for the whole summer to Europe. And the second year that he did that, second year he did it, I got to go with a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old and pregnant with the boy. So that was, and we went for 9 weeks. You can't do that anymore because people have to work during the summer. They can't take that time off. But that was another chance for our kids to meet a lot of different people. You were in Saudi Arabia. You were in Saudi Arabia. Travel is wonderful because it exposes you to so many different things, and then you come home and you appreciate what you've got here too, the ease of living. So
you've always had jobs. You've always worked.
I have always worked, and I've never had to apply for one, really, except when I came into the system there was one open.
And when did you start at Naperville, North?
At North I started in 76, but I worked in the district starting in 1969 over at Central.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Now, I want to go back now and start talking about the historical periods. Yeah.
Right.
And we're studying the 1920s and the 30s. I guess the first thing I'm curious about personally, do you remember the music or the styles of dress, and can you speak about the music that was coming on the radio?
I would like if somebody could tell me what a crystal set is.
Well, that's for them.
Do you know, Tim, what is a crystal set? That was
the precursor to the radio that we know of today.
Yeah.
A tube radio, I should say.
Yeah. I don't know what it looked like, but that's what we used to have. We had a crystal set, and we all had to sit around and listen to it. You couldn't be someplace else. And I can remember listening to not understanding, but listening to election returns, because my dad was a political Republican. And I told Kermit the other day that my first recollection, other than hearing returns, was, dare I tell him
Yeah.
my story? My girlfriend and I going up and down the sidewalks. Now, this would have been, what, 29 or 28? 28. So you figure 23, 28. I was 5 years old. Going up and down saying, Hoover's in the White House, winding up the clock. Smith's in the garbage can, licking up the slop. And I've never seen that anyplace else in any history book about slogans that were used during, but that's my first recollection.
You guys, you read about the Smith election? Now, Hoover,
Al Smith?
he was the first Catholic to run.
Right. He was governor of New York, was
Governor of New York. And Hoover would have been a very popular figure.
he? He was until, well, when did the Depression come? 29. Yeah.
Why was he popular? Do you remember that at all?
No, except that he was a Republican. He was clean shaven. He was a nice man, and he was a good man. He was a good man. That's right. He was, and there's a birthplace out there for him.
Son of a Quaker family,
Right.
a successful engineer, and he also was, well, anyway, I don't want to...
Later on, yeah.
Yeah.
But he was a good man, but he was in bad times.
You said your father was a Republican. Did he stay Republican even after the Depression, or did he come...
As far as I know, he did, because my mother said she and he canceled each other's votes.
Okay. So now you're, in 1932, you were 10 years old. Do you remember Franklin Roosevelt? Do you have an image of...
Yes, that grew, though. The imagery grows because he was around so long. You know, we only had one president for many, many years. And,
Yeah, you would have, your whole high school, yeah, from 32 to 45.
Yeah. It's been a little hard for me to understand that the Republicans had been in office for so long recently, because for us it was the Democrats had been in power forever.
Yeah. Do you remember anything about Roosevelt personally? Did they, like, do you remember hearing him speak on the radio?
Yes, he had a wonderful voice. His fireside chats,
Right.
Remember hearing the King of England resign, abdicate.
Yes.
Right.
Oh,
right.
you remember that controversy? Do you guys know about that? What happened? Do you want to say something a little bit about Windsor?
Edward and what was her name?
I don't know.
Lady. Any of you girls, royal people?
He had to resign because
He fell in love with this divorced woman, and so he had to give up the throne.
Sarah?
No, that's now. Oh,
Okay, so
Yeah.
now with FDR, I'm always curious about, he had polio.
right.
Do you remember any imagery of him in a wheelchair?
No, we were never permitted to see that. You always saw him standing or sitting, but you never saw the wheelchair, you never saw the braces, you never saw any weakness on his part. He was always strong. And Eleanor was the one that, she's my heroine. But she really did a job. And the people hated her for it. The newspapers hated her for it. She was a real humanitarian and an ordinary, intelligent woman, and she put up with a lot of stuff, living with what she had to live with. My husband told a story the other day that he had heard about Roosevelt being wheeled down the hallway, and he saw Eleanor coming toward him, and he said to whoever was with him, "Quick, let's go the other way. She'll have another idea." So she was very interested in the world, in people.
And my imagery of Eleanor is that she gave Franklin a conscience
That's a
made
good way.
him aware of racial issues and peace issues.
That's what we're told, that she fed him a lot of information. She was his ambassador around the world a lot, and brought information back to him.
Do you remember any of the other leaders of that time? Maybe the secretary of the, what was his name? He ran for president. He was the secretary of the, I should have my notes here. The secretary of agriculture.
From Iowa?
Yeah, and he was kind of
Yeah.
he was into the spiritual thing. Well, anyway, do you remember?
Henry Wallace.
Henry Wallace.
Henry Wallace.
Henry Wallace, yeah. I just remember about it. I don't have, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you should be up here.
If we're talking Iowa politics, because he's got a couple of good names.
Henry Wallace was born in my hometown where I was born,
Okay.
Orion, Iowa.
Yeah.
Do you remember some of those people? Those
Oh, do I remember?
Yeah.
I remember about them. I nothing really, except what I read
Now, you
after
told
that.
a story the other day about the Depression. You said you remember your mother saying that they only had 1 10-cent can of meat left.
Mm-hmm.
What was that about?
Well, that was about the fact that we bought potted meat, and we ended up with 6 children in the family. I think at this time there were probably only 5. And we were down to our last 10-cent can of meat. Now, there may have been a lot of potatoes under the house, and there may have been cabbages and all that, but when it came to meat, that was all there was. My oldest brother worked for a grocery chain and he had to do that to earn money, and he couldn't go to college because there was not enough money. He had to work to help support the family. And that was always a disappointment to him.
What are your other images or memories of the Depression? Do you?
You know, when you go through something as a child, you may not realize that you're in trouble. If you haven't had it, you don't really miss it. And we were a family who were happy together. We did a lot of laughing. And my mother had grown up on the farm, so she was a good cook, and she knew I had an awful lot of rice and milk for breakfast, I remember, and lunch. But she knew how to feed us with very little money. And we ate all what we used to call soul food, navy bean soup on Saturday night, homemade bread 3 times a week, pies and cakes. And I didn't know that we were poor, quote unquote. But on Halloween, this is a Detroit uniqueness. On Halloween, instead of going around saying, trick or treat, we took our big grocery bags, and as a group we would stand on the front porch, and then we would yell, "Help the poor! Help the poor!" Now that was between the time I was 2 and 10, so that was Depression time. But Mrs. Blaskovich will tell you the same thing. We're the only ones in the school.
Now, we were talking about yesterday that your memories of World War II are probably. You were 18 in 1940.
I don't know. You'd have to do the subtracting for me.
1940.
Yeah.
So you're entering adulthood during World War II.
Right.
Did that affect obviously your husband was in the war.
He went in like 42 or 43 from here, and so I didn't know him. That's another whole story.
Okay.
And I was working for the government
Right.
during that time.
Oh, so it's right there. Now, I want to.
I had 2 brothers who were in service. I have pictures of them here.
I want to get into the civil rights movement and the social issues because I know a lot of.
Oh, that goes over into the 60s, this class does?
Well, we will. We'll get to the 60s eventually.
Yeah.
But I mean, a lot of your experiences in that.
Yeah,
area.
that's...
And then after we'll talk about that, you guys can. I'll let you guys ask some questions because I have some final questions at the end. But your experience in the 60s was with the civil rights movement.
That's right.
But it would go back into the 50s.
I suppose through the college students, but I think it was, whenever it began, 57, 58, and we began having people come in to speak at the college who were a part of the black movement. It wasn't called black then. And you got exposed to it, and depending on your reaction was how whatever happened to you. And for me, I read 3 books one summer: Invisible Man, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, and Black Like Me. And those books, okay, civil rights was going to be my issue. I understood that one. I could go to work with that. And
I should add here that you just bought one of those books for the library, and all those books are in our library.
yeah. And they're still commended as being good reading. So So that has interested me because that's been 20-some years ago, and to have a book that you read a long time ago still be current says something for the book. But I was involved in workshops called Rearing Children of Goodwill, and that was where I met Glenn Schneider because he came and talked to one of our workshop groups and led us through some things. We had Martin Luther King here, and my husband and I had the privilege of taking him back into the city. 3 of us sat in the front seat, and at that time I think he had only 2 children. He'd just gotten out of jail. His 3rd one was on the way. He invited us to come down and see him, and he was such a kind of a small-statured person and a terrific preacher. He was the world's best preacher. But he was a good civil rights person, too.
Well, that's a great memory.
Yeah.
You guys have some questions? Yeah.
You've worked since, that was surprising to me. Like, how have, the role of, because I don't know about you guys, but I've been taught, raised that women, weren't able to have jobs, and, their job was mostly, domesticated.
Mm-hmm.
And, how would you, describe the changing of, women's, since you've worked? How do you describe, the role of women, changing through history?
Well, it's a good question, because every woman's situation can be a little different. And after I was married, I moved to the country. And my husband decided that he'd go back to college, or to the graduate school, while he was still preaching. And so he was all signed up to come back to University of Chicago. And I was hired to start working as the secretary to the academic dean at Valparaiso University, because that was the area where we lived. And on Sunday, before I was to start work on Monday morning, we were told by our church that we had to move to Indianapolis. So I didn't get that job. I got the job, but I had to give it up. When we got to Indianapolis, I tried to work at a college down there, but it was on the other side of town, and it was a dumb job, and I said, no way. So I stayed at home and kept things going. And then we had children and this sort of thing. And I didn't go back to work until I think our son was almost through junior high. And then for myself, you can sit around just so long, and I was worn out from volunteering with civil rights. I was exhausted, because that was, instead of working, I had volunteered doing civil rights things and church things. So it's, if it's not for economics, a woman's got to find something to make herself feel important. She's got to be doing something. Some people find it just with their children, and that's fine. But don't live your life through your children. Let them live their own lives. But you need to find something. But that's what it was now.
Can you comment on the involvement of the feminist movement in terms of women gaining greater political power?
Well, I remember. Well, it's been gradual. It's been gradual. You can go back to when the amendment was first passed. The suffrage amendment. I remember Betty Friedan, and I always had mixed feelings about whether these women ought to be making as much noise as they were. You don't have to be a man to be important. And this was, you always got the feeling these women were trying to be men so that they could gain stature. And
that's it. You were born 2 years after women got the right to vote.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
So it was always there for us.
Yeah.
It's one thing I wanted to tell the girls. It's not political at all, but during the war, we couldn't have silk stockings. We used to wear silk stockings. We didn't have nylon yet. And there just weren't any available. So we used to paint our legs with liquid makeup to pretend we had stockings on. And you had to get it nice and smooth. And it was great, except on a hot day, if you had to ride a bus. And you got sweaty. You get up off the seat and you left your stockings on the chair. So it was a real treat when nylon came in. I thought the girls might appreciate that.
Some of the guys.
The boys might too. Who knows? We didn't have many runs unless it was.
Tim, do you have any questions?
I have
Yes,
another-
oh, Pam, oh, sorry.
Sorry. What, I mean, I'm interested.
Okay.
What was it like to work with the civil rights movement? I mean, it seems like a fascinating period.
It was wonderful. It was the most exciting time of my life.
I mean, my question is, were you like, with the women issue, were you like brought under discrimination because you worked? And
Yes.
Because you, I mean, did you directly?
Yes, right here in Naperville. Right here in Naperville. There's a house in Naperville that probably has the egg stains on it yet. Eggs were thrown at the back of our house because I was a member of the Human Relations Committee, or the Fair Housing Committee. And the three officers, their houses were all targeted. Mine got hit because the other two people had moved and the wrong people's houses got egged. But yes, and big swastika on the back of our garage door. Naperville.
Now, wasn't there the Catholic Church here? Do you guys have you heard of that being burned down?
Yeah, did you hear about that when St. Peter and Paul was burned down?
Boy, I don't remember that.
That was in 26, right?
Well, she wouldn't have been.
Yeah. It was
Supposedly it was the
Oh,
KKK.
the back then, okay.
Yeah.
Well, my husband's family had a cross burned on their lawn down in southern Indiana. So, but no, that was an issue that I just felt so strongly about, and to be able to do something and then argue with people. Stood up in a public meeting to this lady, and this lady who was a reporter for the newspaper, for the Sun. I said, "You didn't put that in the paper, did you?" And she said, "If you don't want it in the paper, don't say it out loud in public."
Are you going to see Malcolm X?
I want to.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it yet. I want to.
That would be interesting to...
There are many ways of interpreting that picture. You can interpret it as a picture. You can interpret it as a man, story of a man, or you can interpret it as a movement.
Now, okay, we only have a couple minutes left.
Okay.
So what would you say in terms of, well, I don't know, a way to sum all of this up? When you look at the time in which you've lived, do you see, this is my own
Okay.
my curiosity, is do you see hope? Do you see that things are going to get better, that we're going to solve some of these problems that you've confronted in your life, the racial problems, the peace issues?
My husband and I have had a loud fight the other night because I said, as long as there a difference in the color of the skin, there will always be the problem. He said if I had said a problem, it would have been all right. But that's my feeling. We're going to make progress. We've made progress. But anything that is so visual makes it hard for people not to notice the difference. And that, to me, that's going to be a problem for a long time. I don't know that it'll ever change. Only until the third world countries are more, numerically they're more than we are.
Yeah.
Quote, the we
Which they
white
are, yeah.
people.
Well, now,
That's my feeling. I don't know whether anybody agrees with me or not.
do you know the programs that FDR institute? I'm going to go back to the history question, the New Deal. Do you see it in the same way that people depicted it in this last election as something that was bad and created more problems and solved more problems?
I don't know, but that's why history is interesting, to look at it at different periods of time. It solved the problem immediately, and the problems come and go. You know, there was an old friend of your grandpa who used to come to college, and he'd say, it's boom and bust, boom and bust. Things go in cycles. And it's been, what, 30 years since civil rights days, and it's cropping up again now. You know, each generation or each second or third generation, every child has to grow. Their emotions grow, their intellect grows, and everyone has to face problems, and sometimes they're the same problem. I think generally if you were able to categorize them, the problems would be the same. And it's growing.
Yeah,
That's
well,
the problem.
I'm thinking we've been describing it as a spiral of history now, instead of, where you step back a little and the problems are still there, but you're still moving ahead. But that's an eschatological thing, which maybe
Well,
we should-
and the problems change.
Right.
The problem itself changes.
yeah. Okay.
But what would we do if we didn't have problems?
Be
What would
bored.
you do? Would
Yeah.
you play golf every day?
Not golf. Well, thank you.
Oh, well, thank you.
This has been really
You kids were great. You didn't